my favorite experiences working with production designers coming up were those instances where, someone would come in, give me a napkin sketch essentially, and say like, "Go have fun," like see what you come up with. And that was really inspirational. And I really try, I want everybody that I work with to feel like they have ownership of these things that we're creating. You know what I mean? Because this is a collaborative process.
Hello and welcome to the Art Department podcast, episode 38 with Emmanuel Shiu in San Francisco and myself, Urschel, in Singapore. Today we have a special guest. We have Aaron Haye, and he's currently a production designer. He has more than 25 years of experience on feature films, and he has worked on pretty much everything under the blue moon. So I'm going to throw it right to Emmanuel to introduce our new guest.
Yeah, so you guys asked for it, so you have it now. You wanted a production designer. Aaron has a special place for me because, he's probably one of the production designers that I wanted to work with for the longest time, and also my favorite production designer at this point. And I'm not just saying it just to say it, but I always text you. I say, "Oh, wish I was doing this with you." And part of it is because it was so easy to work with you, and we had so much fun collaborating. And I had so much fun. So when we heard, oh, you guys want production designers on, you were my first thought. And I also, as a bonus, your history is so interesting because you came from model making, and that's is really interesting, and I think people will get a lot out of that. So why don't you tell us a little bit, you just start from the beginning as you see fit.
Once upon a
time.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it, and thank you for your kind words. That's the feeling is mutual. Always I'd like to make sure you're one of my first calls whenever I have something that could possibly use your skills. I had, whenever I'm talking about the sort of path that one gets to do what we do, like everybody's is different, right? Everybody has sort of this meandering path, and some people go straight into it. Not my routine. I actually degree in marine biology of all things, and did my thesis work on the reproductive behavior of elephant seals, which is the most random thing you can imagine, but but it comes in use every day in my job. No, actually I do find that that science background actually plays in, because I sort of feel really strongly in, as I'm designing, I believe in like an evolved world, so that when you're building a world, it feels like it's evolved from something, and it's not just, voila, here it is. And that sometimes can be a big problem, I think, in big concept stuff. So I got myself started in this industry actually even before that. When I was growing up, my dad was a carpenter, built houses when I was quite young, and then when I was in high school, he started working at Industrial Light and Magic as a model builder. So when I was probably, 14 or something like that. And a couple of years later, when I was 16, I had started working on construction sites with all these guys that my dad was working with, like doing little weekend projects and stuff. And they hired me for a summer job to do just basically sweeping up in the model shop when I was in high school. So I got a taste of it and was like, well, I digged it. This is pretty cool. But had no idea that would be something I would get into in the long run. And then came back for a couple more summers in college, first couple of years of college, kept working there, kept coming back, sweeping floors, taking out trash, watching what people were doing. Just amazingly talented folks at ILM at that time, in the sort of early 90s, this would have been. And then graduated from college in 95 and was invited back. I was about to go to grad school, and was invited to come back to ILM and work in the model shop, and it was an offer I sort of couldn't refuse. Thought, okay, I'll just do this for a couple of years, save money, go travel, and then go back to grad school and get a PhD in biology and marine science. And but I've always been torn between art and science. As a kid, I was always building rocket ships out of whatever I could find, and I was started making model airplanes and flying remote control airplanes when I was quite young, and or building little stages with action figures and creating instruments and making little music videos when I was 8 years old, with cardboard cutouts and action figures. So in a way, it's sort of, I was just always torn between art and science. Photography has always been a big part of my life. Music has always been a big part of my life. So when I found the model shop first, it was like, well, all these things are sort of coming together, and people were sort of mentoring me, teaching me these great skills, and sort of found my way there into that world, and pretty quickly discovered, I'm not the best hand drafts person or sketch artist. I can get something across, but as soon as I discovered I could use a computer to do that, I was like, oh, I learned AutoCAD at a young age. That was the sort of first design program I learned, because it was sort of rigid and fit the way I was thinking at the time. And it was a perfect tool for building models. That's really why I learned CAD and then 3D, was just to build miniatures. So I spent several years, 7 or 8 years, in the model shop at ILM as a model builder, and started out again sweeping floors, and then by the time I left there, was sort of I had crews of people and working with folks on Star Wars and AI, the Steven Spielberg movie, and a bunch of other fun films of that, Black and Starship Troopers, all these great sort of late 90s sci-fis and stuff that came through there. And then thought I'd start training in CG, picked up a little Maya training, and was really super into also, music videos at the time were so big, so I started shooting little music videos on the side and learning how to edit and how to shoot. And then through some other circumstances, we decided to move to LA. My ex-wife and I moved to Los Angeles, where I didn't know anybody. So I left ILM, which had been my family, my home, and my this wonderful sort of like extended grad school is what I call it. It was just like working with the most incredibly talented people, getting to work on some amazing projects, and ended up doing a little bit of visual effects work at some other model shops down there, and then quickly, like within the first 6 months, ended up actually landing a job on a film as a set designer, that never ended up actually getting made, but it got me in the union in 2002 or 2003. And what a stroke of luck that was, because that sort of opened the door to this new world. And I saw, wow, there's this other side of things. You don't have to do things in post. You can actually, create the designs to start with. And so I started pitching, because I'd been the design tool at ILM, I started pitching myself as a 3D designer, and thought, well, why are we doing everything in a pencil sketch to start with, and then translating it to 3D, and then back to a CAD drawing or a pencil, drawing, and then doing storyboards? Like, if we do everything in 3D, then it's just, you only have to design it once. Of course, that was fairly naive, but it was also sort of, at that time, that was a very new thing, and because there weren't very many people doing what I was doing at the time, it meant, that I found my way in. And
actually, I have a question. To talk about your ILM model days, like, did you actually build the models?
Oh,
yeah. Okay, like, because I you had mentioned that you did CAD, but I figured you probably had to do everything, right?
Yeah. I in the sort of the pictures that I threw up, or I gave you for the slideshow, there should be some photos of me actually building stuff in there, I think, I hope. So yeah, and because I started out, obviously, when you're the wonderful thing about that place at that time, the Industrial Light and Magic model shop was just the most brilliant place to learn everything, because you got a chance to do everything. So I started, in the wood shop and learned the wood shop tools with amazing mentors, and then the incredible sculptors and mold makers in the and the mold shop and the staff shop sort of invited me in to learn that process. And you start by sort of cleaning up in there, and they show you how to cast and how to mold, and then maybe a little sculpting on the side, and then you start chipping away at foam and you learn how to build something, and then you get to work with these wonderful painters. You start out cleaning the airbrushes, which I did lots of with a few other folks, and then eventually you get to start painting models, and so again, all this wonderful sort of experience. And then at a certain point there, I was like, all right, I got to show I was like 25 years old, but I was like, I'm going to show these guys what I can do. And I started pushing the CAD tool to make these really intricate models. And I think it sort of took attention, and I was able to start doing more interesting things, and sort of using that CAD as a design tool to sort of, disseminate designs to other model builders, which was really that first taste of that for me. There was a project on Star Wars Episode 2 that was the first time I really used 3D as a design tool. There was really this rudimentary animatic that this sort of really literally blocks in Maya and the camera moving that for this one sequence. And my boss at the time, Brian Gernand, who I was working for on that show, said, look, George has this idea. He wants this stuff to look like some sort of Art Deco kind of thing, but we've got no designs or anything yet. So I don't know if you want to just sort of take a crack at it. And I literally was like, I went home and I got some books on Art Deco that weekend, and I just sucked it all up, and then built probably 4, 5, 6 buildings inspired by an Art Deco style. And drew them up. I didn't know how to make actual sort of construction drawings at the time, because we were just going straight into sort of CAD and laser cutting and stuff. But I realized that, this is a new process. I'm gonna do this. And how often does that happen, when just like a model maker gets to design the look of some buildings on a street, and this whole sort of sequence? And it was really like eye-opening for me. And then again, like, because of the magic of the time and the place, we're shooting that sequence on stage, and the DP, the visual effects DP shooting it, would come up and say, like, come on over here, and like, because obviously at the time, when you're doing motion control, which is what we were doing for these sequences, it takes a lot of time to set everything up, and you have a lot of time just to sit and chat. And the DP would be like, come look through the viewfinder, like, why don't you line up this shot? And just like, you don't get that opportunity as at this point, like, whatever I was, 27-year-old kid, but it was just really wonderful. And I just so appreciate all those mentors and really amazing folks.
Yeah, you don't get to do that now, even.
No.
That's a very rare thing. So basically,
no, but
you went from.
I will say, Emmanuel, that like I try, and it doesn't always work, but if I see somebody, at whatever part in their career, whatever point in their career, you see people who are talented and hungry, and you see that, and you go like, come on, just give us a little more than whatever you're doing right now. Why don't you come over here? Like, come to set. You've never been to set before? Come to set. Like you're drawing this thing, and you've never actually been able to, like, come to set and see what that means, see how it's translated, because that just gets those gears clicking. And I know it did for me. So it's really important for me to sort of like try and, as you say, like we rise with the people that we're with, and that's I truly believe that.
So then so I get it now, because I was thinking, wow, CAD. Okay, so CAD to laser cut.
And at the same time, I was trying to teach myself Photoshop and all this other, that nonsense, those little, but I was doing it to, like, design, CD covers or whatever, not to do concept art, because that was way outside of my comfort zone at the time,
So then you went to LA. And started to sort of get onto jobs. Sorry, I mean, I really just wanted to know some of the ILM stuff. Okay, continue, please.
I got hired as a essentially a set designer. They called me a draftsperson. I'd never knew what that was really. I'd seen obviously blueprints and construction drawings, but we didn't really use those as in visual effects, barely. I think I saw my first construction drawings on Star Wars Episode 1 when we were building. I think it's the Theed City set. All these lovely sort of beautiful old style buildings, and the first building I got was this hangar, and it was these blueprints were just cut off at like 10 foot, and there was nothing, no information about anything above. And I was like, how can this happen? Why aren't we designing the whole thing? Like, if you're going to draw it, like, we should just be drawing the whole thing. So anyway, that's what sort of got my brain thinking about trying to start in 3D from the beginning. Anyway, back to the Matrix sequels. There was this wonderful group of folks, and we were sort of in this, again, a laser room drawing parts basically for other model builders to create the miniatures, or in this case we call them bigatures, because the models were so huge. It was like, we filled giant stages with enormous miniatures essentially. And the art director that I was working for on that show, 6 months later, when I moved to LA, called up and said, I've just started this other movie with the same production designer. We'd love to have you on. And I was like, okay. Mm-hmm. I had no idea how sort of lucky I was at that point to have that invitation into the union. I had no idea, honestly. I'd been a union member at ILM, because at the time visual effects was union. Go imagine that, right? But getting into the Set Designers Guild at the time was really a unique thing.
Was that part of the 800 or?
Not yet. No. That was the second union I joined before, and then I joined 800, and then they merged after I joined. But anyway, so when I was there doing those first couple of shows, I didn't really do blueprints properly. I didn't really do construction drawings very well. I watched how other people did it, and quickly tried to teach myself how to fit into that world, and quickly sort of build that portfolio. But what I focused on was trying to visualize things in 3D and get those designs in front of basically concept modeling. I didn't know what it was at the time, but that was what we would consider concept modeling now. And sometimes I would do little animations, because I had learned a little Maya, so I could run a little scene and run a camera through a set. So again, it sort of it made my skills at that time fairly new in the art department. So then from there, I just sort of bounced from show to show, continuing to learn as a set designer for sort of 5 years. Worked on some really fun shows at that time, Watchmen and a few other great experiences there. My first experience in motion capture was a show called Monster House, which was a lot of fun. One of those early sort of mocap shows, and sort of realized fairly quickly as I was doing this that I really enjoyed the part that I loved about being a model maker, or a crew lead as a model maker, was that I didn't have to be behind the desk the whole time. I was out in the at different stations working with people, building stuff, and sort of I didn't realize it, but I was art directing. That was essentially what I was doing. You're sort of like jumping from one thing to another, helping get an idea across visually. And so I thought, all right, I'd like to join the Art Directors Guild and give a shot at that. And I again got very lucky. I was working on an amazing film as a set designer, Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And when I first started, I said, I'd really love to get bumped up if possible. And they thought, no, I don't, maybe.
What's bumped up? Bumped up to what?
To an assistant art director, from a set designer. And then I had another opportunity come along. It was an odd situation, because another production designer I had worked with, James Chandland, who's obviously famous, wonderful, incredibly talented guy. I had worked with him on a show called The Fountain, where I was sort of doing a little visual effects work essentially for him. I sort of ran these trees, this spaceship tree that we built, so he called me, at that same time and said, "Would you like to art direct for me?" I was like, that was sort of what inspired me to be like, okay, yes, I want to be an art director. That's right. That's what I want to do. And and so that's sort of when I went to the incredibly talented and amazing designer that I was working for at the time, Don Burt, who's got some amazing stuff behind him, and hopefully will do well again this year. He and they supported me. They bumped me up and gave me amazing responsibility on that show and showed me what it was, what I could do. And sort of, I never looked back. I kept working as assistant one more time, and then art directed the next show I did after that one, and art directed for several years, and then started supervising art directing, and then immediately was like, I want to keep doing this. I want to, and had the opportunity to design, and I've been sort of sticking with that ever since. As soon as I got a taste for it, I realized that this is what I love doing. I love sort of building teams. I love coming up with blue sky ideas, and I love iterating with talented people and amazing directors and producers, and helping writers discover the story through visuals, and then building a world for actors to inhabit. That is like, it's an amazing opportunity, and a really wonderful collaborative process when it works. Sometimes we bang our heads against the wall, but I've found that it's something that I feel fairly suited for. I really enjoy it, and each part of the process, because it's so, production design, it's not like you're doing one job. You have to conceptualize, you have to budget, you have to plan, you have to schedule, and then you have to manage. You have to be a cheerleader, you have to be a camp counselor, you have to be a politician, and you have to be an artist. And it's really a bizarre job. But
well, it's funny because because for a lot of I think for the viewers, I think a lot of people would find it quite interesting that there's so many hoops to get through before production design, because obviously that's what I hear as well. Like you go from your set design or whatever, you go move up, assistant art director, supervising art director, then production designer. Can you I'm wondering, when you go from art director to supervising art director, that's just a position, right? Or are there different tasks?
Oh, it's different. I mean, it's definitely, supervising art director is a very hard job. It is a hard job because you get to feel responsible. The first time I was a supervising art director was the most stressful job I've ever had in my life, because I felt responsible for everything, and I really believed in the designer. I believed in the director. I loved the story. And I had a really tough producer who made life difficult for all of us. And it was the first time I realized, this is really, really hard. It's because you have to be responsible without necessarily getting all the creative input, right? So that, I feel like there's a difference right there when you get to sort of really be creative as well as take the stress on. It somehow counterbalances.
It's worth it. It's worth it. Yeah.
But I honestly, I really enjoyed supervising as well. The folks that I worked with in that role were wonderful, and it's hard. And I really, really respect, good supervising art directors are really hard to find, especially folks that stay as supervising art directors are worth their weight in gold, because so many folks try to jump into the production designer job, and but we all need really, really good supervising art directors. Just like we all need really, really good assistant art directors, but that's a really hard position to fill because people are always moving out of it,
What are some of the sort of job responsibilities of a supervising art director? Let's say, I mean, because what is?
So ideally, you want to, as a supervising art director, you want to take a lot of the burden of scheduling and budgeting off of the designer, so the designer can focus on politics and design, basically, right? Because sort of a good way to think about, when I first started to really consider designing, I was working on Man of Steel with Alex McDowell, who's just an incredibly talented and very generous designer. And he had taken me aside and he said, "You'd make I think you'd be a good production designer. You should consider it. But just know that we only spend maybe a third of the time, 20% of our time actually designing anything." And that's just, again, like a third of the time designing would be generous, because there's so many other things to do as a designer, that the supervising art director really has to help relieve that. You know what I mean? So building calendars, building schedules, managing hiring. Obviously, as a designer, you want to buy off on all of these things and sit with them and make sure that the calendar and the schedule work, and you sort of, but that legwork is really vital to do. And sort of the way I found my way into that particular job when I was doing it was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I hated Excel spreadsheets, and budgeting was just a nightmare. But I was like, okay, I'm going to make these budgets into a work of art. I want to make them look good. I want these calendars to I want to be proud of them. I want to, and so I sort of like tried really hard to like develop like an elegant Excel spreadsheet where you could enter numbers in and things would all fill out, so I could budget based on these wonderful sort of spreadsheets and flowcharts and then again try to pass those, once I learned those tools and created those sort of those templates, like pass them on. Like I've always been all about that, like trying to share what I'm learning along the way. And I've found, like, years ago, when I started set designing in Rhino, essentially, went from AutoCAD to Rhino as a 3D tool, but I was pushing really hard, like, everybody, get off this AutoCAD thing and come onto Rhino, because not only can you build in 3D, but then you can do your construction drawings in this CAD program, and it's super cool. And just started sharing templates with anybody who wanted them, and all of my shortcuts and scale figures and layouts and all this sort of stuff. And years later, I was working on a film in Atlanta, and the set designer I'd never met, never had any connection with, like, opened up his file and he was using my template, and I was like, yes, that's great. I have no idea how you got it, but that's great.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so funny because when you hear art director, art director, a supervising art director, everybody thinks, well, it's art direction, right? It's, it's an art director. Actually, it's not really that. Most of the time, it's not.
You still have to be fair. Like, as a supervising art director, you also need to go out and, not just be in the office and deal with paperwork. That's definitely separates that supervising position from so many other, the regular art directors. I'll call them regular art directors. But on a big enough show, you'd have art directors for sort of every big set or sequence or however it's going to be, and then somebody to oversee all of that and manage the whole department, and then the designer to sort of oversee all of that and all the other departments you're responsible for. It's a lot, and it's really good to have partners in that. You got it. Like, every show that I've done, I need to feel really, really good about the supervising art director, the set decorator, prop master, construction coordinator. Like, I got all that stuff. Then the rest we can figure out, right? But if you've got really solid department heads, essentially, then the rest can sort of fall into place. If you've got any weak links in that chain, then you can be in big trouble,
So tell me a little bit about, like, how do concept designers and illustrators fit into this? And when Aaron says designer, he's talking about the production designer, because I want to reiterate, because a lot of people may misunderstand or not know. But when it comes to because you mentioned obviously you're coming from a model maker background, and so when was like kind of when you started really working with concept designers and illustrators, and how was that?
Well, I mean, first, I mean, even back at ILM, right? I mean, all those amazing artists that we still know that worked in the ILM art department. Started collaborating with them way back, on those early Star Wars movies or AI, like, for instance, that sequence that we talked about early on. I was talking about the where I drew these sort of Art Deco buildings. I didn't know anything about color, so did some renderings and that first part, we didn't get any direction really as far as what the palette was meant to be for that. So we did this Art Deco sort of neighborhood, and then painted everything to fit this. Right, this was the first time we were seeing something different, and so these buildings were sort of gray and a little bit off blue, and just a little, it was Star Wars, right? And then we brought everything out, set it all shot on stage, and George Lucas came through and to look everything over. The day we were supposed to start shooting, had with the camera crew following him around, and said, "This looks great. I want to make that building blue, that building yellow, that one red. Let's just go crazy." So we wheel everything back across the street out of the stage, like it was back at Kerner, where you had to go, half a mile back to the model shop and start repainting everything. So after that, so we had done that basically somewhat independent of the art department. And after that, then we had, at that time, I think Warren Fu came in and did on the next set of Crazy Buildings on that same film, he did a paint over pass, I think in Illustrator at the time, over this sort of rendering, and gave us a color palette to work with. And so that was sort of my first experience. And then obviously, once I got into art department proper in LA, I started watching, I didn't understand the sort of, the way everybody was divided up. I didn't understand that, who did what essentially until I just watched. And it was like, okay, that guy's sort of the boss there. Okay. And this guy's he's over here in the corner drawing, painting, with watercolor sometimes back then, and then this guy's on Photoshop. Oh, this person is drafting with a pencil. Okay. So tried to watch what these folks were doing, and, get tips and tricks and from everyone, until I started going, okay, if I build this in 3D and then I paint over it in Photoshop, okay, well, that looks pretty good. I'm a set designer, so I can't actually sign anything. I can't do concept art, but I can do concept models. And so I started doing that. I was sort of sneaky in that regard, but I was trying to stretch my skills. And at that point, I know a lot of folks, in that same path might have decided to go in, I know folks who go into the Illustrator path from there. They go and say, all right, I'm going to take my 3D skills and now I'm going to start concept art. I wanted to do that, but I missed being on set, right? So that was sort of that calling that kept me sort of going back to like, okay, I got it. I guess I better art direct. But now, all these years later, when I have a project that's coming up that's like, okay, time to start conceptualizing. I'll do little scribbles, as like just little notebook scribbles, and then call up Emmanuel or call up, all of these wonderful folks who I miss terribly, and start conceptualizing and collaborating with these, because again, it's just a collaboration. There are these amazing designers. We are a family of designers who all contribute to a final product, and everybody has a piece of that in this sort of process to build to a final goal, which essentially, everybody feels proud of the last thing that they do, which is like, okay, your concept art that you might create for us is beautiful and we're proud of it and it's lovely, put it on the wall. But that's just the beginning. Then somebody has to translate that into a construction document of some sort. We have to break it down and say, like, this part's visual effects, this part is a set, this part is going to be this material, this part's going to be that material. All right, now let's take it into the set deck department and let's start picking what's the surface going to be. Well, let's go to the paint department and pick swatches, and we start doing samples. And you keep going down that line, and you have to manage that the whole time, from that first concept art to literally picking doorknobs and fabric for curtains. But then you're still not done, because you have to get it all on set once it's built and once it's dressed and once it's painted, and then you have to light it, and then you have to work with the DP and say, like, well, you got, what about this? Do you see, like, this you sort of collaborate with the lighting and director of photography to make sure that your work is going to be better than you intended it to be, because that's their job, to find the best shots, and I think that's what each one of those steps is, to like elevate. Sometimes you go, but we are always trying to elevate to the next level, and I always sort of like make best friends with the rigging gaffer, who's the guy who goes in with his team to hang the lights at the behest of the gaffer and the DP, because I'm like, I think I'd like a light over here. What do you think? And sort of try to get to make sure that set's going to be lit the way the DP wants, but also the way I think might help the set. So, and then it's still not done, because it needs to be edited and visual effects added in, and so I'm always collaborating with the visual effects supervisor and the producers to make sure that it's such a big project, every film or commercial or television show or whatever it is, and every one of those jobs is so vital, and that's the thing to keep in mind.
At what point are you actually done? Like, I mean, because you don't go till the end, but so at what point are you done?
I'm usually done when camera stops rolling, right? That's generally the way I go, right? So oftentimes I'll stay in touch with supervisor after principal photography is finished, in order to make sure that if they need any other design information or just to look at some shots in process. But that's rare. I mean, honestly, it's because oftentimes we're on to something else by that time, or the process is so downstream. So when I get most of the time, when I see a film at a crew screening, it's the first time I've seen the whole thing, together, basically. Like, I've seen shots, I've seen, roughs, but I really love seeing a premiere, because it's really, I get to see it with everybody else, and so yeah.
So I remember, that's awesome, by the way, and I remember we met on Blade Runner.
Yeah,
that was the first time I've worked with you, and
worked together. I think we may have met when we were at ILM briefly, but it was just passing. Like, we didn't know each other, right? Because you were working, I think my dad was working in the same building as you, right?
Well, at that time, I actually knew your dad and worked with your dad.
Yeah.
And we used to, sort of have our go get coffee and sort of bitch and moan sessions.
Yeah.
And I really didn't think anything of it, and because his dad was the union representative. So when I'm trying to, George is telling me, well, you want to get in on this, you're gonna, I still remember sending you an email and sending you some work and trying to see if this was something that could work out. And I saw the last name, I was like, I wonder, because his dad's name is Jack, and I was like, wow, I wonder, but I don't know. And I sent you work, and then that was the beginning of our relationship.
A beautiful friendship. Yes.
Yes.
And I'll just say that, my dad, I'll mention again, like, he started as a carpenter and then started in the model shop as a model builder, and then similar to me, in the sort of early 90s, before I started in the model shop in earnest, he went to CG in the early 90s, started training in 3D and started working as a match mover and then a modeler. Yeah, he stayed at ILM for 20 years, just about. But as a union representative, when they went non-union, things didn't work out.
Yeah.
But anyway, so back to but really wonderful, talented, incredible man. Still making. He does amazing Burning Man installations for the last many years. Yeah, incredible inspiration, one of those guys. Yeah, so when I saw your work, I was super stoked, and I'd known you were another of our sort of ILM, guys, and that was my first. I mean, crazy enough that Blade Runner would be the first opportunity I had to design anything as a production designer, even though I did not actually get credited as a production designer and I didn't do the final work. I got to conceptualize the film, which was just an incredible opportunity. I had been a supervising art director on a previous show with the same producer, and he called me and said, look, we just need somebody to come and sort of do initial concept stuff. But that little team we had, there were 5 of us, right? But I think, but everyone just hit it out of the park. Like, we had so many, in a typical, I was so spoiled, honestly, on that, because on a typical show, when you're blue sky, basically, you have so many designs and ideas that just miss or go slightly afield and foul tip. But that team was just on, and like probably 90% of the stuff that we came up with in that 6-month period ended up in the film in some form or other, and so I think that was just such a blast, so much fun.
Yeah, that was such a bummer that you didn't actually get credit as a production designer, and I certainly was like you said. I mean, a lot of the stuff actually ended up being in the film, so I was like, oh man, that's awful, but okay, it happens.
It was a gut punch, but it was also it was a learning experience where it was like, this politics are very important, right? And there's a lot of optics to something like this, and this incredible. I mean, Denis is such a talented man and so generous and so wonderful. It was such a joy to work with him. But I mean, to the studio's credit, like having that be my first production design credit would have been a stretch, I guess. That was probably.
Well, I mean, stretch or not, Jan, actually, I mean, did you have any questions you want to ask?
Yeah. I'm just trying to fit into the conversation here while you guys are chatting.
Yeah. I mean, because if you don't get in there, we're just gonna end up talking the whole time.
That is fine. That is fine, as long as there's a nice conversation flow going on. I mean, I have a question in terms of. I'm looking at your credits and what you've done and what you've worked on, and I'm wondering. Maybe it's like two separate questions, and one is maybe about kind of like your favorite project in whatever capacity you worked on it. I mean, I have a hunch, because you said before you're like a music fan and you built like stages as a kid, and then you ended up production designing Bohemian Rhapsody, and I mean, I don't know if that was like. If you felt that was a bit of the culmination of all the different strands of interest that you personally had, and that you got to do that, which was a fantastic movie, and because I'm also a big Queen fan. But I'm wondering, like, what was your, maybe it's different. Maybe it was a terrible show. I have no idea, right?
No. I'll elaborate that. I'll say, yeah, that was a really special show, and I will go into that a little bit more. But I will also say that The Curious Case of Benjamin Button was really near and dear to my heart because of that first opportunity to sort of art direct big stuff that just felt it was an incredible opportunity, and I really felt like I learned so much on that show, and I met my wife on that show. So I met her while in New Orleans, I should say. She doesn't work in the film industry, but randomly on my second week in the city, I met this random person that I ended up marrying a few years later. And so, of course, has to be, you know,
Yeah.
yeah. And of course, all the sci-fi is so dear to me. I like love it all, right? But there's a lot of bad sci-fi. I want to work on good sci-fi. Blade Runner being one of those, right? I mean, that's just such a you know, when you get that kind of opportunity. But and Bohemian Rhapsody sort of came about as a bit of a surprise and a left field thing because as Emmanuel knows, we were working together on another show with the same director before that. I had been after Blade Runner went down, I did conceptualized a different sci-fi thing for the same studio that never got made. So I spent actually a year and a half on stuff that never got made, for me anyway. I never got to take it to a set, which was a strange experience, but it was like I'm just doing concept design with a small group of artists for a year and a half. That was like such great leg stretching, you know, and just, you know, a mind expander to get out of the art director mindset, which is as an art director, you're always trying to figure out how things are done. As a production designer, you have to figure out like what's possible and what the boundaries of your world are, right? So that's sort of that transition. But so I was doing actually a version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea with Bryan Singer that was never made, but spent many months working on that with Emmanuel and George Hall and a number of Victor Martinez and just incredible group of people. And that same team sort of had come with me from Blade Runner, basically, right? You know, and so we were going to do that film, and then there was this little TV thing that he said, okay, let's go do this this little X-Men spinoff, and then all of a sudden Bohemian Rhapsody came up, and he said, we're going to go do this. We're going to go to London, and then we're going to go immediately and do 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And of course, that never happened because Bryan Singer and so on and so forth. But Bohemian Rhapsody was an amazing experience. I will say it is probably my favorite experience to date in terms of like scope of work and, you know, how dear the project was to me. I mean, I love Queen, but I wasn't the biggest Queen fan. But getting to know the history and getting to actually know the band members and, you know, getting to be that involved in somebody's life really was just, it was such a blast to do. I had never, that sort of period drama biopic thing ended up being just so much fun. I had such a great team. It was hard, of course, as these things will be. And it was so different from every other experience I've had because of the way Bryan worked. He didn't come on any scouts to go location scouting. He didn't go on the tech scouts, which is the moment when you go and like say how you're going to shoot everything. So it was an interesting thing between myself and the DP and the first AD. We had to sort of like figure out how we were going to shoot this movie. It was really a blast. Yeah, we were really lucky, and he, you know, Rami Malek was just such a gift from the beginning. We saw how committed and talented he was. I think everybody on the crew was just super committed, and that's what sort of made that show special to me was just the level of commitment from every level, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would think, oh, Bohemian Rhapsody, you know, like, so what would someone need to design there? You know, I think there, I get a lot of that. I think a lot of people don't realize how much there is to design, especially I think on a modern day set. Well, I mean that you actually have to reproduce things. There is actually. Can you go into that a little bit? Like, what were some of the challenges?
Well, first of all, for folks who are, you know, coming at things from concept design or from game design or whatever, it's important to understand, again, what production design is, because, you know, the simplest way to look at it is that if you see it on screen and it's not an actor, we have to be responsible for it in some way or other, right? So somebody on the art team, whether that's in props or set deck or art department or down in visual effects or whatever it is going to have to decide. We're going to have to decide how big this room is. We're going to have to decide what color. We're going to have to decide what furniture to put in it, where to place it. We're going to have to figure out how to age that stuff. We're going to have to pick the colors. We're going to have to pick everything, from wall socket color and the light switches to everything, to the textures, and again, it's nothing you can get out of the box. You have to sort of be intentional about that. You can just go to a location and shoot it, but that's fairly rare unless you're on a smaller budget and need to just get stuff done. There's always something we're going to touch, basically. And sometimes on a show like Bohemian Rhapsody, you get to be really intentional about it. That show was so fun because it had a specific timeline, and that timeline happens to be incredibly visually compelling and very easy to follow. So the palette in 1973 was vastly different from the palette in 1985. And so one of the first things we did was to create a timeline and a palette, and basically say, like, for these 3 years, we're in this window, and for these 3 years, we have these colors that inspire us, and these 3 years, these colors inspire us, and boom. And so you get to tell a story visually, as part of that narrative. You're always trying to, again, the goal of design and film is to support a narrative and support characters and build a world that allows actors to feel like they live there, like they belong in that time or that place. Whether it's on a starship, you want them to feel like they're actually on a fucking starship. On a starship. And if you're in if you're in a crappy apartment in London in 1974, you want them to feel like they're in a smelly London apartment in 1974, even if it's built on stage, and to have, in that instance, again, Bohemian Rhapsody, to have Brian May and Roger Taylor, the original members of Queen, walk on set at Live Aid and go, wow, like literally Brian May said, I've got chills up and down my spine. This is crazy. That's a cool feeling because you feel like, okay, we're doing our job. We're making a world where the actors can feel like they belong. And when in this particular case, the folks that they were playing are actually, still with us, and producers on the film get to come there and go, yep, you got it.
Wow, this was so interesting. Because a lot of people would also ask me, if I wanted to be a production designer, and my answer would always be no, hell no, because I have been to a set actually, but I don't enjoy building sets and being responsible for their construction and then all their costs. And because I remember one time on Spider-Man, I did a lobby, and the production designer came back to me and said, well, that lobby is going to cost $1 million, so we don't want that, so you're going to have to make it cheaper. And I was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And yeah, and because I had put all these windows and all these things on them. They're like, no. It looks cool, but it can be, it's going to cost too much. And it really gave me the understanding of what a production designer does. And I think for a lot of people, it's really good for them to know, hey, a lot of people think, well, maybe that's a natural path, right? I mean, you get to a certain point, and then if you want to go up, what do you do? And I talked to George about this, and we're both of us like, no production design for us. Just tell us what you want to design. We'll close our door and design that thing, because there's just so, you have to naturally love working with people, like you said, the politics, working with different groups of people and different needs, concept designers, set builders, draftsmen, art directors, the director, producers. I mean, it would just drive me insane.
Prop makers, painters, and then set decoration. Like, that's a whole other art, is being able to like go and pick fabrics. That's a different experience. And for somebody who I came from a different thing. I didn't go to art school. I didn't go to design school. I didn't go to art center. I learned this stuff along the way. And I say sort of like, I'm a hack in that I have learned, meaning that I've sort of like had to, I've never done professionally what I went to school for, essentially, right?
Oh,
Same here.
And exactly, right? But I think that's what I mean by that. Like I operate a lot on instinct and hard work. Like essentially, like I love learning new tools, and I love that was sort of when I was younger in my 20s, and like I'm going to learn 3D, I'm going to learn film editing, I'm going to learn audio recording software, I'm going to all these tools. Like you can do all this stuff. It's so cool. And now, like I still would love to be able to learn new tools, but I don't get a lot of opportunity anymore because of the sort of thing that I do. And I'll segue into like sort of for the last year, I've been lucky enough to be working from home on an animated film, which I can't really talk about, but it's been an amazing project and very different. And it's allowed me to sort of stretch things that instead of going on set and pointing, which I do a lot, I've been, in these Zoom meetings with monitors all around me and working with artists from all over the place and getting to be back into 3D again, which I haven't done for a long time, where I'm actually trying to teach myself Blender, and like this is such a freaking cool tool that I get to, I've been a Rhino file and teacher for so long, and now I'm like, wait, teach me Blender. I want to know this. This is so cool. Again, because it's just another new tool. So again, something that I always sort of try to with everybody I work with, like push yourself, do something different, do something outside your comfort zone, because I've always done that. I've never it's just, I think in my nature that I kind of, once I know how to do something pretty well, I kind of like, all right, what's next? What am I going to learn now? What's, like push yourself and find, so as not to get bored. And that's one of the things about this particular job that's so unique, is that we never do the same thing twice, essentially, right? It's every film or TV show or whatever, it's going to be a little bit different. And the crews are different. And I've also, as you know, Emmanuel, like I've been in this strange situation where I've not done a film in the US even in 7 years. It's a very strange thing, the tax incentive world that we've been living in. I think it's been 7 years, maybe 6. I've been bouncing around from one place to another. Home base is here, California, but the nature of the business has changed because of incentives and because of politics and everything else. That we end up shooting all over the place, other states, other countries, and I've been fortunate enough to have a family who's like, okay, great, let's do it. So we pack up and move every 6, 9, 12 months, and it's a very interesting lifestyle, and one that doesn't suit everybody. And thankfully, I have a wife who's and kids who are into it. But where you could live in Los Angeles and have a job there all the time, it just doesn't. Some people are lucky enough to have that, but it's not been my fate, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with continuing to. We don't take vacations anymore. We just go take shows on other countries.
That sounds really interesting, actually. I mean, for some people, that's super awesome, and for a lot of people who don't. I mean, it's the time of the internet. Aaron and I actually have never met in person.
I mean, it's hard to believe, but after all these years, like it's crazy, and we're gonna have to fix that one of these days.
Well, I mean, we're only 3 hours, I think 3 or 4 hours away from each other.
Yeah. I'm a little further than that, but yeah. I think once you've got your shot on, we're gonna have to take care of that. And we sadly, well, not sadly, we're once again going to be leaving country soon. So thankfully, my wife and I have been vaccinated, and gonna go do a show in Ireland for a
Wow.
little while. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Oh,
I have
wow.
maybe one
That's
last question, and I
go
don't
for
even
it.
know if it's
Yeah.
a question or if it's just, I mean, it's something I'm just out of pure curiosity, and I don't know if I can bend it even into a question. So Emmanuel, you need to stop me if I keep on rambling on for too long. It's maybe about and I kind of got an idea of where you stand, Aaron, in terms of I don't know how to call it, like pragmatism versus indulgence. And I'm wondering on a show like in general, and on a show like in a period show like Bohemian Rhapsody, like how much room is there, and how do you approach it, where you like you think maybe on the one hand, oh, I just need to get stuff done, because at the end of the day you maybe have $100 million, but that is still not infinite money, because you have to, well, it has to pay for everything, right? And so there's still
Dollars, but
I don't know how much it was, but you've worked on plenty of shows with like anywhere from like a medium to like a really big budget, but at the end of the day, the budget is not infinite, and you still have a certain budget allocated for each set or each scene or whatever. So I guess there's a certain feeling of like, okay, you have to figure things out, and you have to just kind of make it work to a certain degree. But I mean, maybe for yourself, like, is there a part of you that thinks like, oh, this is great, and we'll try to get it done, but like, where's the part, like, is there room for indulgence, where like, okay, in order to recreate the look of 1973, let's try to get the film stock and the cameras and the lenses that been used during that time, and try to get that feeling, that thing in camera, and that's a way to differentiate, I don't know, 73 from 85? Or is it more like, okay, we'll just do that in post through color grading and through other means? I don't know. Is there
well, okay, so I think you have multiple questions.
Yeah, maybe.
But honestly, it's a really good one, because the difference between pragmatism and indulgence. Okay, let's make those extremes, and I'll say that there's a balancing act, right? Because we have to take the whole budget or the whole film and break it down, and oftentimes the producer's got a number in their hand, and they're not going to tell you what it is, and they come to you and they say, all right, tell us what it's going to cost. And so you have to go and then like break it all down and say it's probably going to cost, and you could just throw a number out there, but I don't like doing that. I think it's irresponsible for yourself, because ultimately you're going to be the one paying that price if you don't get to do what you want to do. So it's important to sort of go through everything and say, here's approximately what everything's going to be. Here's the big number, right? So then when it comes time to, before you've built anything, there's always back and forth with producers and the director and the writers, and figure it all out. And you say, okay, if we need to hit this number, which they finally give you, this has to come off, or this has to come off. And you sort of horse trade, and you say like, okay, so maybe we don't need to build that set giant, and maybe we do need to do this. And I think it's incredibly important as a designer, as a production designer, to have solid relationship with the producers. So you can go in and say, here's why I believe we need this money, right? We need this to give you X, Y, Z. That we're telling a story right here. If that story is important to you, we should put our money in there. I don't mind letting it go for this other thing over here. Like, that's fine. We can find a way to do that for some smaller number. And the other part of that, and I would say this is a good piece of advice, and at least for me, don't take any of it personally, right? Like I could spend weeks, and I learned this from back in the day as a model builder at ILM, where literally spent months building a set, and then going, like, in one of the first instances I ever got to go on location, build this giant miniature set with a bunch of other, model builders, and then go to a wave tank in North Carolina and embed it in the tank, and dive to the bottom and bolt it to the, all this great stuff, and then crash a big wave onto it, and months of work, millions, literally. And it got cut from the movie, and you think, well, don't take that personally. You did the work, be proud of it, move along. And I feel the same way about whether it's a sketch, whether it's an idea, whether it's a whether it's a piece of concept art that you love, like you did the most brilliant piece of art, right? It's gorgeous, but we can't build it. It's not buildable, or somebody doesn't like it, something about it, you know? So I don't take that personally. I hope you guys don't. When somebody goes, nah, it's out, you know? So that is my pragmatic side. And part of like, as someone who has to like do the jujitsu and the, you know, this sort of, all these waves are coming at you, you have to sort of let them crash around you and not be overwhelmed by them. Because as I said, that first time I worked as a supervising art director, I felt wave after wave crushing me. And that was, again, because I hadn't learned how to dissociate my feelings toward the art or the craft or the process from, you know, the process of production, which is crushing at times. And I had a producer who, once we were already building things and you know, committed to a process, came into my office and said, I need you to cut 30%. Like 30% from the overall budget is a huge number to cut. And I said, you know, we've already done that. We can't do it again, you know? And he said, watch me. And he came over and took my budget and he just started just cutting things, like just taking numbers out, 30% off the board. Like, oh God, it makes me nauseous just thinking about it. So back to the question, like how to balance pragmatism and creativity, I'll say. I think that the first thing that I like to do when approaching a project with the artists that I'm working with, as well as the producers and the director, is to say, like, you know, if we're blue sky, especially where we can do anything we want, like, it's our job to find the boundaries of our world, right? We're going to build a world. We don't know what it is yet. We may have no idea. We may have some concept of what it's going to be, but we know we need to figure out where the rules of that world are and how and when we can break them. And so I think of it as a box, that we need to put the film in a box and we need to find the walls of that box. And yeah, it's okay. Sometimes we're going to break out. But once you know the boundaries of that box, then you're free to create within it, right? And whether that's budgetary, whether that's creative, whether that's conceptual, whether that's a color palette, whether that's anything, right? You can use that analogy for anything. Just find and shove everything inside of it. And inevitably, you've got more, you know, to put in that box than you intended. But for me, that's a key sort of the way I get through it in my brain, you know, psychologically. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
I mean, I don't know if there was a direct answer to the question. No, but it satisfies me for sure. And that's very interesting. Is there, I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of, like, I don't know, something that comes completely out of a designer's mind, like that, or something that, like Star Trek or something that has to be completely designed versus something that is like that a certain amount of people have lived through and experienced and kind of know exactly where, if those details are right or wrong. Do you have any favorite of what you like to do, or is it again in the balance of like, oh, sometimes I like to do something really high level sci-fi and then I like to do something really grounded the next time? Is that kind of how you'd like to see your future? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, when people ask me like, what do you want to do next? I'm like, well, whatever the universe presents that I find, you know, exciting and interesting. I want to find, because we're all storytellers, right? Whether it's, you know, I feel like production design is an arm of this creative process. Just like as concept artists, you are telling a story. That's the whole idea. And so I'm attracted to stories oftentimes, and sometimes I'm attracted to just like the filmmakers that are involved. Like, I really like working with this person, so I'm going to go do this movie. You know, it's going to be great. Not sure what the product is going to be, but it's going to be great. You know, it'll be fun. But I love blue sky world building. You know, it's absolutely it's a unique opportunity that we always get when you get to sort of create you know, worlds and cultures from scratch. It's really just a joy. And I got to work with some really amazing production designers as I was coming up, who were just amazing world builders. And seeing that process of designing languages and going deep into cultural history for an hour and a half, 2-hour movie, but to understand. And again, I'm attracted to that because as somebody who studied evolutionary biology and genetics and super into that process, again, I feel like the most successful sci-fi films, or the most successful films in general, feel evolved. They feel like they came from something. They feel like they belong to a world, and everything that's in that world belongs to that world. So again, a long way of putting, I do love that. But I feel the same way about an intricate, period drama, because it's the same process. You are creating a world in which characters and objects can live and feel cohesive, holistic, evolved, and as one. And that's the goal anyway. Sometimes we fall short of that for whether it's monetary or creative or all the other sort of failings that we have. But a boy can dream. We can. So
No,
yeah.
I think it's super interesting to hear, a perspective of a production designer, especially to this level of detail. I think because I think a lot of people, or a lot of the concept designers, aren't aware of really, like what goes on, because a lot of time it is a little bit of a mystery, because you talk to you get you don't get PD, and you you get your assignment and you're off, and a lot of times nobody's really there to explain to you, this is what it took, these are the fights I'm battling on the other side, 10 other departments, nobody knows that. So
yeah, and we're just going like, why is he not replying my email?
Yeah.
Like,
Another way to think about it is like, a designer might come in, a production designer might come in and stand over your shoulder and be short with you, or not give you all the information you need. And what you don't realize is that, like, they just came out of this grueling budget meeting, or an 8-hour production meeting, or whatever it is. There's so many other battles that we sometimes have to fight, that we don't always give our best to everybody. And I've definitely been on both sides of that equation. And my favorite experiences working with production designers coming up were those instances where someone would come in, give me a napkin sketch essentially, and say, like, go have fun, like, see what you come up with. And that was really inspirational. And I really try, I want everybody that I work with to feel like they have ownership of these things that we're creating. You know what I mean? Because this is a collaborative process, and you want to feel ownership without letting it affect you personally, without taking it personally when somebody says, that's shite, throw it in the trash.
Yeah.
So and sometimes you can find design ideas from unexpected sources. Somebody who is not, you've got all these amazing concept artists or art directors, coming with ideas, and then a PA can just say, like, sketch something that's really interesting. You're like, okay, now let's take that idea and run with it. And sometimes I like to open things up to people and say, like, what do you got? Like, anybody have any cool ideas for this? I mean, oftentimes there's not space for that. But when there is, if there's some sort of thing, you want to do something different with this section of the set, like, go for it. You got a great idea, and sometimes we do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think that sounds like a good place to stop.
I was just going to say that.
What do you think, Jan?
Yeah, unless you have any last question, or Aaron, you have any last recommendations to give?
No, I think there's always more to talk about, but
Part 2.
It's a school night essentially, but no, I think we really went through it. So
awesome. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We'll put some links to your work and to your IMDb profile and whatever in the description of the video. And thanks so much again for taking the time, especially out of your weekend, to talk to us. And I'm sure you're plenty busy. Just to add another hour of looking at screens around you instead of enjoying life, right? But
my pleasure. I didn't the screen all weekend, so now it's no, it's always good to chat, and I love talking about what we do as a group of people, and I'm so glad you guys are doing this podcast for folks that are both in the industry with us and are interested in how you make your way through. So
great.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. And for all the listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and give us suggestions for maybe other guests you want to talk to. Anyways, have a good week, guys, and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.